Artful Thinking. So
Oh, wow. Those are from the past. Well,
they are.
oh, what fun. Well, I
So they
better
were
look at
excited
them
when they heard it with you.
now. Thank you very much. You're very kind. Um, all right. Well, I am delighted to be here, and I'm especially delighted to see all of you. You probably know that Kelsey and I have been talking a bit, and she's told me about the amazing work that you do and shared some of it with me. Um, and it's just, I just am always inspired when I hear about people working with young people trying to use art as a way to help people understand the world. It's just, every year that goes by in my life, it feels like it becomes more and more important to do that. So not only am I excited to be here, but I am grateful. And I want to hear something about you. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to tell you what our agenda is. But you'll see that the first item in our agenda is a little deeper introduction. So in a moment, I want to hear your name, a little something about you. So here we go. Let's see. Okay. Let me try to get this in slideshow mode. Come on. I think that should do it. All righty. I will let you take a second to get your screen adjusted. And I actually need to get my screen adjusted so I can make sure I can see. Okay, so here's our agenda. In a moment, I'm going to ask you who you are, and I'm going to actually do so in the context of a little bit of art. And then we're going to take some time to simply do a thinking routine together, see, think, wonder, with a little bit of an add-on. And this is something I know you're all familiar with. It's a little bit daunting sometimes to do see, think, wonder as a fresh participant when we use it so much in our practice. But I, like you, will take that challenge. So I look forward to that. And that should take us some time together. And then then I'll stop sharing my screen. They're actually at the end, there'll be a little bit, we'll do that as a whole group up until the end. And at the very end of that, the little extension part, we will break into small groups of 4. And with your permission, I'll just join one of your groups and be a participant. After that, we'll come back and we'll have a whole group discussion and we'll use our experience as a touchstone to really sort of talk about some of what's at the heart of artful thinking. Then we will take a short little bio break, 5 minutes, and then we'll come back. And I think we'll get to a lot of questions along the way, and you're welcome to ask questions along the way. But I have you've sent some questions in advance, which I've done some clustering to try to bring out main themes. And I know you're coming with more questions. So after we come back from our break, that'll be a time to really sort of do some talking about the questions that are on your mind, I'd like to be as helpful as I can be. We'll close. I do want to close with an activity that brings us all back together. So that will take about 10 or 10 minutes or so. So we'll close with that. But then I'm available until 2:30. So for anybody who wants to hang around and have some more conversations or have some more questions, I'm happy to have some more informal discussion at that time. So I hope that sounds good. And let's just jump right. Does it sound good? Give me a thumbs up so I know. All right, wonderful. Okay, so I want to ask you who you are, and by that I mean what's your name and your role. I know that you are with Art in the Dark, but if you just want to say a quick one sentence of who you are, but I also want to know how you're feeling today. And I want to do it in the context of looking at some works of art. So I'm simply going to invite Kelsey. She can see you all on screen, so I think she'll go around and sort of point to each one of you or call each one of you, and you can say your name. And then if you're so moved, choose one of these images or a piece of one of these images and just say how it captures something about how you're feeling today. And I will start just to give a little model. So you know me, I'm Shari Tishman. I'm a researcher at Project Zero. I'm a developer of Artful Thinking. And if I had to pick at this moment, I sort of held off until I looked at this fresh, I would pick the picture at the bottom, the vase of flowers, because I'm feeling pretty nice. I'm delighted to be here with you. I feel, like I hope that my mood matches a vase of flowers, but there's a little part of me that's a book that's half off the table because I know that we'll talk about some things that I know are in a book, but there's always the unknown, that little bit of uncertainty that's a pleasant edge when you're meeting new people. So that's me. Kelsey, I'll hand it to you to call on people.
I'm just going to go in a line from the people that I can see. So let's start with Trisha.
Okay, I am Toby and I share the co-chair of Art in the Dark, and so we've been working on the Artful Thinking program and getting that. We're planning this year. We've introduced all new presentations with Artful Thinking in them, so we're very excited about this presentation. I think I'm like the dancers. I had a good swim this morning. It was pretty great. Feeling pretty up and looking forward to it.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Trisha.
Go ahead, Toby.
As Trisha said, I co-chair the program for the middle and high school classes. I too am the dancer. Definitely like this is a great leap forward. There's a lot of excitement of all kinds of things that we're doing. I'm launching a program on Hung Lu and getting a great response from teachers already. So and the permanent collection is going to be up in the spring, and we're hoping to have many of the works in that we use in our various presentations between kindergarten and 12th grade. So thank you.
Nice to meet you, Toby.
Suman.
Hi, I'm Simon. I'm actually on the board of Let's Look at Art, and hope to be a future Art in the Dark desk. And I had done a little bit of training in the past. And I would say that I'm possibly a mix of certain things, possibly the old man looking out and hoping to observe and learn a little bit of that book on the edge, a little uncertain myself. Energy wise, I always like to think of myself as, the dancers are a woman doing the jeté over the other woman. Of course, you have to be quite an expert to do that. So possibly a bit of wishful thinking going on. Let's call it hope.
Very nice. Nice to meet you, Suman.
Nice to meet you.
Linda.
Hi, I'm Linda Cortinas. I'm coming to you from New Jersey. I'm in the midst of moving, and I think today I can relate to the boxer because my body has decided to revolt on me, and I woke up with a pretty bad back pain.
Oh no.
But just like the boxer, I will persevere and I will not let it stop me. So there's a little reflection in that as well. And I'm happy to be here and to be included.
Nice to meet you, Linda. Thank you.
Go ahead, Mary.
Hi, I'm Mary, and I do the newsletter for Let's Look at Art. And Art in the Dark is relatively new for me compared to a lot of other people. I see maybe the statue because he looks like he's ready to learn, interested, and might just get up and start walking soon. So we'll see how we do.
Nice to meet you, Mary.
Go ahead, Joseph.
Hi, my name is Joseph Koa, and I'm new to Let's Look at Art training last year, and I'm training now for Art in the Dark. I learned a lot because I reviewed the webpage and edited it a little bit, so I felt like I had to know it really well in order to make the wording correct. I feel like I'm the teapot, and it looks transparent, but I'm actually very full today because yesterday was my first class for the year. And one of the kids looked at a Rivera painting, and at the bottom there was an orange mask, and that orange mask was a chicken mask. And he said that that was the seed for a chicken tree, and when it grew up, you could pick the chicken feet that grew on the chicken tree.
Wow.
So although transparent, the pot is actually full.
What a great metaphor making. Nice to meet you, Joseph. Thank you.
Yeah.
Beth, can you go ahead?
Hi, I'm Beth. I've been with Let's Look at Art 10 years now. I got my pen this year. I chose the boxer because that's the one I chose for my presentation. I absolutely love that piece. And he's kind of like me, old and tired, but I'm hopefully still in good shape.
Wonderful. Thank you, Beth. Nice to meet you.
Barb.
Good morning. I've been with Let's Look at Art 7 years, I think. And as soon as I did the K5 training, when Trisha came in and introduced Art in the Dark, it's like, I want to do that too. So the very next time I had a chance to go through training, I jumped on that. Like you, Sherry, I was drawn to the flowers and the books. I did get up and exercise this morning, but not like the ladies. So I feel relaxed and open, and I was actually reading my book while I was on my exercise bike. So flowers and books are something I'm very drawn to, and I'm excited about going through this training.
Wonderful. Nice to meet you, Barb.
Lilia.
Hello, everyone. So I'm glad to be part of this training, and I started volunteering with Let's Look at Art from last winter, I think, the training. And in summer, I learned one presentation, critical thinking topic. And I also have an art history degree with concentration in modern art. And I would like to choose Van Gogh's Oleanders. I just really like that vividness of color and that color intensity of nature of painting, and it just gives the vibrance of day today.
Nice to meet you, Lilia. Thank you.
Debbie.
Hi, my name's Debbie Watson. I'm also new this year, and I've just been learning about American art. My creative art form is quilting, and I think today I would choose the first image because it feels like I have a whole lot of little tiny dancers running around in my brain.
Interesting. Nice to meet you, Debbie.
Sergey.
Hello, everyone. My name is Sergey, and I started with the Art in the Dark program last year. And among these 4 artworks, I guess I'm most identifying with the yellow book lying on the table with Van Gogh's Oleander's painting. One reason for that is because Van Gogh is one of my favorite painters of all the time, and another reason is that I like books in general, and it's natural for me to identify with one. Thank you.
Thank you, Sergey. Nice to meet you.
Erin.
Hi, everyone. Nice to see you all. And Sherry, thank you for sharing your time with us today. I've been with Let's Look at Art for 23 years, I believe. First with portfolios and mostly with the Art in the Dark 6th through 12th grade. After all these years, I'm still excited about it. It hasn't bored me in the least. Every time I work with students, I understand the value of what art can do for us, how it can open our mind, how it can change our minds. And so I am looking at the dancer because the first image, when she's on the ground, she has her arms folded. And as she leaps up with joy, I see that she's opening herself possibly the analogy to new ideas and how art can change, viewing art deeply and closely can change us. So thank you.
Beautiful metaphor. Thank you, Karen. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Tony. You ready to go, Tony? That's okay. Do you want to unmute?
Unmute, Tony.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I missed my cue. My apologies for coming in late. I had an earlier appointment. But my name is Tony Mish. I have been 12 years with Let's Look at Art, and hope for another 12. The painting, I missed the question, but I'm assuming what painting do we identify with this morning, right?
Yes.
I think, in spite of the fact that I'd love to have shoulders like the boxer, I think the Van Gogh too. There's something about still life in general. There's a kind of, and this is such an extraordinary one. There's peace and there's unity and there's a kind of formality, and also the books are something I identify with. And I say, and oleander is poisonous, which is interesting too. So maybe that's part of it.
Thank you. Nice to meet you, Tony.
Nice to meet you.
Tony, right? We got it.
Tony, yeah.
Marcia, if you're able to share.
Thank you. I am able to share at the moment. I'm Marcia Klein. I have 9 years in the program, and I went with the boxer because I am blown away at the emotion expressed in this very hard material. And I'd love to share that with students and have them see the emotions beyond the sculpture itself. So thank you.
Nice to meet you, Marcia. Thank you.
And then I believe it's Jeff and Shannon, and then we're all done.
And you, Kelsey.
I'll go last.
Hi, good morning. Jeff Bordona. I'm the Director of Museum Experience and Education, and have been with the museum for 30 years next month, actually.
Yay.
I'm identifying with the boxer today because, over 30 years, I've been through a lot and I've seen a lot, as it looks like this boxer has, but I'm always looking forward with curiosity to kind of see what's next. So I'm very happy to be joining you in this session today and look forward to hearing how our volunteers can implement artful thinking in the work that they do.
Nice to meet you, Jeff. Thank you.
I'm Shannon. I am our group tours and family programs manager, and I identify with the boxer today because I've spent the morning doing battle with our printer, trying to get some heavy cardstock printed for our upcoming community day. And I am getting ready for round 2 with that printer.
Wow.
I think
to meet you, Shannon. Thank you.
I think Leah might have just joined us.
Hi, yes.
We are just going around and we're sharing who you are and then choosing an artwork on the screen that you identify with this morning.
All right. Thank you.
I can go and then give you a second to think. So my name's Kelsey. I am the manager of K-12 curriculum and instruction, and I get to work with our Art in the Dark and Let's Look at Art groups. I am identifying with the teapot this morning. I appreciate sort of the presentation of balance between like sturdiness and fragility and big and small and practical and impractical. So I'm really feeling that, navigating that balance these days. And I really like that artwork. Leah, when you're ready, if you want to share who you are and which artwork you identify with.
Leah, you're on mute.
Leah's also a brand new mom, and I wonder if she had to attend.
Yes. Okay. Nice of you to share that. Well, why don't we move on, and then if Leah can follow them. Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I feel like I know you a little bit more than just a name, so I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, let's move on here. Just so you have them in case you want them, these are the artists. And I will share after our time today is over, tomorrow or something, I'll send a PDF of the presentation to Kelsey and she can give it to you. So you'll have any of the information that's up today. So you don't have to worry about capturing it if you don't want. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to move into doing a See, Think, Wonder routine together with a little add-on at the end. And the purpose here is to look at some art together, to have this shared experience, and then we'll use this experience as a touchstone as we think sort of more deeply about artful thinking. But I invite you to just participate as you would have your students or your audiences or whoever you work with participate. But I do want to ask one thing before we start. I wonder if there are 3 people who are brave enough to volunteer to be a participant observer. That is, you'll participate just as everybody else will, but you'll have a little question in your mind that we'll come back to in this discussion. And I'm not going to tell you what the task is now, but if I get 3 volunteers, then Kelsey is going to text you, not text you, she's going to direct chat you your instructions. So if you want to volunteer, raise your hand or indicate it. And Kelsey, I will just let you pick 3 people and direct chat them and tell me when you've done that.
All right, I have Trisha. I need 2 more. Tony. 1 more. Mary, thank you. I will direct message all of you now.
Okay, thank you. And this is a relaxed assignment, so nothing to fret about. Okay, I'm going to show you an image, and we're going to start off by just taking a close look at it. This is an image by the contemporary photographer Gohar Dashti. She's an Iranian photographer, and this is part of a series that she calls Home. So why don't we just take start off by just a quiet 15 seconds to just let our eyes wander over this and see what we see. And in a moment, I'll invite you to put some observations in chat. But for now, just look. So I wonder what you're noticing. I'm going to invite you to share your observations in chat. And if you'd like to do 2 kinds of things. One, sort of share an observation that came in your first glance of this image. What was something that you noticed right at first? And then you might even label it second. What's something, a detail or some part of it that stood out to you as you started to look more? And if you could just put these in chat, it'd be great so that we can all see them. First glance and second glance. Great observations. First seeing that there's a flower bed, that there's flowers, the flowers really stand out. Pointing out that there's trees in the back and that they're white as if maybe they're covered with snow. The tree in front is green, which is kind of an interesting puzzles. The walls, I noticed that people are noticing things about the walls. They're deteriorating. Perhaps you're noticing the different colors on the walls. Some sort of comments about the specifics of the flowers, sort of standing straight up, almost as if they're people in a crowd. Interesting comment. First look is the flowers. The second glance is a sort of seasonal contrast. Interesting. And again, more about contrast. Ah, you're such good observers. You've had practiced this. You're seeing so much. It's really interesting. And again, people bringing out this notion of contrast. With second glance, the patches on the wall, the nature is lovely, but so this idea of this growth of nature, the flowers are growing up, and yet the walls seem to be decaying. Again, a sense of abandonment. If you've entered something into chat, take a moment to look back at what your colleagues have noticed and see if by looking at what other people have noticed and then looking back at the image, something else stands out to you. Is there anything else that's standing out to you here? Some questions starting to arise as we look closely, wondering about the space. Interesting question about the door on the left. Is it open? Sort of a mystery out there. Interesting, this sort of second sense of the flowers, maybe they're sort of trapped in this small space. And then there's a sense of the outside again, you know, people keep coming back to sort of this interplay between the foreground of the flowers and the background of the outside space. People are noticing the geometry, sort of the formal dimensions of the work. Moving into some ideas, freedom on the outside, but trapped, the outside is dead. Again, sort of really careful noticing of what the seasons of the outside look like. Somebody's pointing out again about the formal properties, the perspectival properties, one-point perspective. And also again, with formal properties, sort of noticing how the colors of the flowers sort of really move our eyes around. And the dual wall colors as well is almost like a nice, interesting comment, minimalist landscape mirroring the interior-exterior play. Great observations. Something about the asymmetric perspective through the windows, blocked by the flowers, the sense of the flowers wanting to go through the windows. I really appreciate how carefully you've picked out details here. I wonder if there's any more detail that somebody wants to pull out, maybe something in the color of the soil or something on the walls or anything that is standing out to you now. Sense of reuse that somebody's bringing forward, that this seems to be a derelict building. We've all noticed details that tell us that it might be abandoned or derelict or in decay, but then this strong growth also, and the minimal color palette. Nice. Okay. Beautiful observations. Let's pause for a minute. And more are coming. I'm just going to take a look at this last one from Lilia. 3 walls and a door and windows that openly connect with the outside. There's a somber mood with the cloudy weather. I really appreciate how closely you've looked at details, and I feel us moving into sort of really standing back and thinking, what's going on here? What are our thoughts about this? So let's move into the think step. You've shared some thoughts already, this sort of sense of contrast. What else do you think about this work? What are some of your thoughts? What do you think is going on? What thoughts do you have? You know, I'd love to be able to do this verbally now. Let's give it a try. I'm going to rely on Kelsey to call on people. If you have something to say, either use the little raise hand sign or just raise your hand. And let's see if we can do this verbally. It's a little challenging in Zoom, but let's give it a try. So who has a thought they'd like to share? Kelsey, I'll let you reach out.
Toby.
Well, when you said that the artist was Iranian, you know, when I looked at this immediately, I thought of the beauty of women represented with the blossoms and creativity that's forced only in the home, and then the outside of the political situation, which for which they have no there's no acceptance of the women to lead a normal life, what we call a normal life.
Really interesting to see that inside domestic and sort of bring into the domestic sphere. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Tony. Go ahead, Tony, when you're ready.
Oh, sorry. That the flowers on the interior, I can't not think of them as human figures, all of them standing in a crowd. And maybe it's because the artist is Iranian that I see them either as a crowd of protesters or a crowd of military.
Interesting. Interesting. Thank you. Other thoughts?
Trisha.
Yeah, I kind of feel like the more I looked at it, I started feeling like the flowers and the whole room is confining. It's kind of stopping. Whereas the nature outside is the beauty of the nature. So it's almost as if inside this building, things are being confined, and that patch on the wall on the right is kind of denigrate. You know, it feels like it's dying. So I kind of feel like the flowers want to get outside and they're being stopped by the wall. But I think the flowers are people. So it's kind of people being confined and not being allowed out into nature.
Interesting, very interesting. You know, your comments are reminding me of something that I think the artist has said about this series. She says, there are no people in it, but it's about, the images are about people. And she's sort of very non-specific about what that means, but some of your comments have really brought some life into that. It's very interesting. Let me show you, I want to come back to hear more about what you think, but let me just show you, I'll give you a little more information in the form of images. So here are a couple on the top. I think there are 5 images in this series, and on the top are a couple more of the images from the series Home. On the bottom, you'll see Gohar Dashti herself behind a camera. She takes, as you can imagine, quite a long time to stage these scenes. And on the bottom right, you can see some people setting up the scene of that particular image. Just as a tiny bit of biographical information, it won't be any surprise to you to hear that she was born, I think, in 1980. She grew up near the Iraqi border, and at that time there was a war between Iran and Iraq. Although these images aren't made in the town where she grew up, they're made in other parts of Iran. And she very much has her upbringing in mind and her home in mind as she makes these images. So I am going to go back to the image and see if I noticed that I can see that some other people have raised their hands and have a comment to make. Kelsey, if you want to call on people, we can hear some more thoughts.
It looks like Beth and then Suman and then Barb.
Okay. Hi, can you hear me? Oh my God. Okay. I'm along with Trish and what she said, you know, it's the people looking out, but I find that even though they're looking out, it really doesn't look that great to go out there. It's not a beautiful scene to me. It looks foggy, maybe half the trees are dead. So even looking out doesn't look like it's a real bright future.
Interesting. Some other folks who want to chime in?
Hi. So what I thought about was 2 things. Firstly, when I heard that the artist is Iranian, I thought about the close connection that India has to Iran. And just this was just appreciation of that physical building, you know, with half green and half white. There are all-time buildings in India that looks exactly like that. So that was one thought. The other one was the flowers inside. When we think about women indoors, or rather confined within a burqa, but still being able to bloom inside nevertheless, even though they're in a confined space. And then lastly, after seeing the other pictures, I confess, a little disappointed to see that this was staged. I thought it was actually growing, but perhaps it was just put there for the photograph. Anyway, those were my thoughts.
Ah, interesting. Thank you. Let's take.
Oh,
yep.
sorry.
Please go right ahead.
Well, when I first saw it, the flowers growing in the house and the decay and everything, and the color palette, the whole thing is very depressing to me. Even though the flowers are sort of a sign of hope, they're kind of sad looking. They're not bright. They look kind of either towards the end of, or, I mean, there's just nothing hopeful in this. It's this decay and extremely sad to me.
I actually have a different opinion than that. When I look closely at the flowers, I see that they're planted in dirt and I see that they're standing tall. And to me, it looks like they're not wilted, like the leaves aren't wilted. So to me, it represents, yes, maybe the situation isn't the best right now, but that there's hope that it will improve. They're planted in dirt. They have, if we have the idea that they've been watered because they're not wilted and dead, then they have roots. And the roots connect them to their past, and hopefully the hope will connect them to their future.
Interesting to have these sort of two different interpretations, both of which, I don't know about you, but both of which call to me. I mean, they sort of add up to a little bit of a whole greater than the sum greater than the whole. Let's take one more comment, and then I'd like to move on to some questions, and then another. We'll actually stay with this image for a bit. One more comment. Does somebody want to share a thought?
Looks like Sergey may have had your hand raised first.
Very well. When I see an image of a bunch of flowers growing on a dirt inside of an abandoned room, the first thought that pops into my head is not interpreting it as a kind of allegory, but rather as a dreamlike image that possesses that mysterious kind of beauty that you can also see in a meeting of an umbrella and a sewing machine on a surgical table, as the saying goes. And when you see this image, when there are two seemingly incompatible things meeting up, like the flowers growing in this abandoned room, I think the best question to ask is not what is this imagery symbolizing, but rather why shouldn't there be flowers growing in an abandoned room?
Interesting sort of switch that you're making there of perspective. Thank you. Very interesting. Joseph, I notice you have your hand raised, so why don't you be the last comment before we move on?
I would kind of agree with two of the interpretations. I look at the room, it's in a state of decay. I look outside, it's not particularly inviting, as some people have said. I look at the flowers and they're trying, but it seems as though they're trapped because they're flowers and they can't move in a building that's decaying with a future that doesn't look so good outside either. So it's questionable, where did the flowers go in my mind?
Great question.
So they're home, but they're home in a place that there's something has to be brighter than just the flowers themselves.
Maybe they're home, but
they're trying.
It's a permanence.
Yeah.
Beautiful. You mentioned the question, where do the flowers go? So that's a great segue into our next step. So why don't we'll do this step kind of quickly, because I actually want to add on to this in a small group setting. But first, why don't we all just type a question into chat? I'm sure that we have many questions about this work, but why don't we get get a bunch of questions in chat, and then we can sort of look across them and see what we see. So what do you wonder about here? What questions do you have about any aspect of this work at all? Great questions. How did the flowers end up there? Where were they before? History of this space. How are they able to bloom and survive inside? So many of your comments have had to do with what the larger life of these flowers. Beth asking a question about the artist's intention. I wonder what she thought the message was to be to us. Interesting. Ah, what are the flowers thinking if the petals are their minds? Beautiful metaphor. I invite you to scroll through the questions of your colleagues. It's a fascinating list of questions. I keep remembering the comment from the artist that I shared with you about how there are no people, but it's about people, and you are bringing so much sort of substance to that idea through your comments, I think. Who am I? Wonderful question, Tony. Who am I? Such an important question, I think, to bring to any work of art.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, I am going to use that as a segue to the next little thing that I'd like to ask you to do. I'd like to now ask us to break into groups and do 2 more steps that come from a different routine. I think some of you might be familiar with it. It's called See, Think, Me, We, but I'm just tacking the me, we steps onto our experience, and I will show them to you. So what we're going to do is we're going to break into groups of 4-ish. With your permission, I'll join a group and be a participant, as will Kelsey. And we're going to ask you to do these things. And Kelsey is going to put this in chat. And along with this, I don't know, Kelsey, I think we may not have given people the link to the image, but when we put this in chat, we'll also put a link to just a slide that has the image on it so that you can see the image. But we invite you to do 2 things. One, go around your group and pretty briskly, each of you say how you might personally connect to this image. Some of you have already moved a little bit in that direction. And then once you've done that, stand back a bit and ask yourselves together, talk together about how might the work be connected to bigger stories about the world. And again, many of your comments have connected to that. We're going to do this kind of briskly, and we'll come back together in 7 minutes. So I think Kelsey is going to whisk us off into our breakout rooms right now. Is that right, Kelsey?
Yeah, you can go ahead and accept your room. Try opening the link before you do so you have access to that. I put it in the chat.
Did you assign me a room as well? I think I'm going to get
doing that. Right.
Yeah, I'll stop sharing. That'll be how it works.
I'm gonna go ahead and put you in room 2.
Great, thank you. And we'll see everybody back in 7 minutes.
Hey, Tony, you're gonna want to move. I'm gonna move you to. Let's see. Did you get an invite? Let's see, I think I can rejoin. Move to. We'll have you go to me see, it's not letting me. Okay.
Here I am. I went to the link and lost all at first, as you suggested, and
Message.
I tried leaving and it didn't let me leave. Are you
We're stuck in the room with the flowers.
It says we have 2 minutes left.
Oh, yeah. There's a little timer up in the
So
upper right.
usually what happens is doesn't it just bump you back?
Normally that's what happens.
Yeah.
They abruptly end your session.
Right.
Like,
Oh.
wonk.
I hope we have something a little more hopeful in the next image.
Well, she was given all images from our presentation, so I'm hoping we're going to see some of those coming up.
Yeah, what people have done. Have you turned those in? Did you send those in too?
Well, I didn't do new ones,
Oh.
Trish. I had the ones that I had done for you earlier.
No, what I'm saying
Yeah.
is a part of getting ready was sending her images from our presentation and asking
Oh.
her to present relative to images from our presentations, and that during a breakout session, there might be an opportunity for people to present what they had done.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping people,
well, the boxer, that was interesting that was one of the choices this morning.
yeah, I chose the boxer because I think it's a really good one.
Love
And
it. I love the whole
so
story.
strong in the presentation.
Yeah.
And you
So,
received mine, Trisha, and I read Barb's. Barb's
yeah, I received yours. Yeah, and we need to talk about yours. We'll talk about it another time.
Okay, because I wasn't sure. It seemed like we could go on, and then it finally devolved down
I
to.
think it's because you haven't taken training yet, and
Yeah.
so the idea of focusing on certain objectives for an image,
Yeah.
will help. I think your questions were great, but there were so many of them that it kind of. But once you understand the presentation and why an image is there and what the objective you want to obtain out of that image is, it focuses you on the questions that you want to do. But that's all part of training. So as soon as you're ready to start training,
Yeah.
I'm happy to start working with you. I think it will help focus and make it not seem so overwhelming.
Okay. Good.
I think that would be
Recommended. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll get you there faster, and it won't be as confusing, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay, we're back.
Are we all back? Great. The magic of Zoom. Wow. Well, I am very grateful to have been able to be in a fascinating small group conversation. I'm going to just say a very quick word about the group that I was in, and then I want to invite anybody else to throw in a comment or two, but then I want to turn to our participant observers and get back to our original task. So I just want to make the comment that my group made just phenomenal personal connections to the work, but also, there was a sort of back and forth between the personal and the global. And as I was listening to different people's connections, I kept finding myself thinking about these very big ideas, but then coming back to these amazing details of the work. And it was sort of this really interesting back and forth for me. I think what I'd like to ask you as a group is if that conversation about your personal connections and the sort of larger stories shifted in any significant way your perception of that work. Did you come to see that work differently as a result of the conversation? And just, raise your hand and speak right up. Karen.
So I think Sergey opened my mind to the possibility of, unlike the rest of us, the possibility of this being a dreamlike, surreal painting He talked about how our brains are subdued to making logical conclusions when we're sleeping. And he just opened my eyes to the possibility that there was another side to it than what I was thinking. So thank you, Sergey.
Thank you, Karen. Anybody else want to make a comment? Mary.
In our conversation, so much of it was starting with our perceptions of what the meaning of the work was and how it resonated, and the extent to which we had, as a larger group before, talked about the political messages of it, as opposed to the personal messages that our group surfaced around trying to survive in the world and needing walls at the same time that maybe they hem us in.
Wow. Beautiful perspective. Thank you. Anybody else want to make a comment?
Looks like Beth has your hand up, Beth.
That's good. Beth, then Suman.
Yeah, I think I'm saying this right for our little group. When it came up, a lot of it is that people had completely opposing ideas. One saw hope, one saw this, the other people saw no only depression and destruction. So this real contrast or juxtaposition in the interpretations I thought was really interesting. But yet at the same time, I see both sides of that, definitely.
Isn't that just, I mean, I'm just going to editorialize here. Is one of my favorite things about working with art and people is that you see the value of contrasting interpretations, and it's a place in life where you can see that, and other places in life can be much harder to see that. So I appreciate you bringing that out. Suman, let's hear a comment from you, and then I want to stand back.
So I was in the same group as Beth, and I was going to say something similar too. And also, while I was talking about what my perceptions were in the group itself, it was that whole thing about both the inside and outside had elements of both hope and despair, whether it was inside or outside. The one thing that struck me was that if these flowers were outside, they probably wouldn't survive in that desolation. So perhaps it needed the confines of this derelict building to be held inside until they could grow enough to be strong. And I thought, like, sometimes you think that maybe something that's a chain or a prison perhaps isn't really, is what I thought. And I thought that was interesting. I didn't expect to think that.
A very interesting perspective. Gosh, I've learned so much since this conversation, and I've looked at this work before. Okay, let's stand back. At the beginning, I asked for 3 volunteers. Thank you, volunteers. What I asked them to do was to be alert as throughout this whole exercise to what they were seeing as signs of learning as we were going along. And it was very open-ended, any kind of signs of learning at all. I intentionally left the challenge vague enough so that you could interpret your own way. But I'd like to turn to that topic now. In a moment, I want to ask all of you to think about that. What signs of learning in yourself and others in any way did you notice as we went through this process? But I want to start by asking our participant observers, if you're willing, to share a few thoughts with us. Who was a participant observer? You want to just wave? It was Tony, Trisha, and Mary. Could you each just very quickly share a few thoughts about what you saw as signs of learning? And thank you, Kelsey, for putting the prompt in the chat. Great. Mary, do you want to start us?
Sure. As people got into looking deeply at the work, first of all, they were looking at the contrasts visually. And then people started expressing emotion around those contrasts and around what they saw. But for me, the other aha, especially with this group, was the extent to which very quickly prior understanding of art and then understanding of the world situation came into those observations. And so people being able to attach this work to something they knew was really, I thought, really important learning that went on and reflects how kids learn, how people in general learn.
Absolutely. I really appreciate that. I mean, some people define learning as making connections between new knowledge and your larger web of knowledge, but we certainly know, if you take a constructivist view of learning, that we certainly know that making connections to your own world is an essential part of meaningful learning. So I appreciate you pointing that out. Tony, do you want to share? It was Tony and then Tricia, right?
Yeah.
Okay, Tony, what did you notice as signs of learning that really stood out to you?
Well, what I noticed throughout, but it was the first thing I wrote down, and it continued throughout, was that each idea led to another, and so that there was a kind of a chain through ideas within each individual, and it also then it becomes more a complex sort of web of ideas leading to other ideas. So there's a kind of a growth going on. And also that the general ideas, and in particular at the beginning, the sort of first formal impressions of the piece become more elaborated. You see more things. And out of that, from those first visual impressions, you begin to move away in a way from just the description of the piece to these complex narratives that begin to develop. You begin to build a story around it. And then from that, you begin riffing off one another's stories, and you're comparing each other's stories and maybe evaluating your own in comparison to others. And finally, this sort of intense personal identification that came out of it. So that to me was all from beginning to end a process of growth. That was really fun.
I love your description, and just to throw a little comment in here, I mean, you're really capturing sort of the dynamism of learning, and I think you're also capturing what I hear you saying is that you're taking signs of learning as signs about learning about the work is one object of the learning, but also about learning about other people and about yourself and about the way that knowledge develops. You were taking as another kind of sign of learning. And I just want to point out something that, of course, you all know is that when we're inviting young people to learn about works of art, we're inviting them to learn about works of art and a lot more than works of art, about themselves, about their peers, about the world, and so forth. So you really nicely captured that, Tony. Thank you. Tricia, what do you want to throw in?
I think what I noticed what for me was the largest experience in learning, if that even makes sense, is as the different experience and perspective of other people broadens your mind, and that I think is learning. So because of experiencing other people's answers and how they're relating to it, I think it broadened my mind. I think as docents, we have a long history of the more we look at an artwork, the deeper we go, the more we think about it, the more we learn. And that's kind of, it's a learning experience, except it's one that we're heavily trained in. So it's an expected,
right.
You expect to do that, and you do it, and you're broadened for it. So yeah.
I love how you bring out that we learn from other people's interpretations, and sometimes, and one of the signs of learning that I feel like I see is that you could learn from somebody and not agree with them, and yet have their comment enrich your understanding. When somebody puts forth an interpretation or perspective that doesn't make sense to you, it still widens the possibility space. And again, it's a beautiful model for other ways we might develop understanding in other realms. So what other signs of learning stood out to people? Now let's open it up to the group. What signs of learning in yourself or your colleagues did you notice that were striking to you and felt important?
Well, it's all an evolution. I mean, it's like when you look at the piece, you see one thing, but then it goes to the next. You can't see everything at once. So it has to come through an evolution of staring at it and looking at it. You just can't interpret everything in one full swoop. It takes time.
It's such an important thing, isn't it? I mean, to understand that learning takes time, that looking takes time, that most importantly, that understanding takes time, and that first impressions are fleeting and need to be built on. I think that's such an important, to use a fancy word, epistemological message to send to learners, is that learning takes time and it develops over time. Somebody, Linda has her hand up. Linda, what did you notice?
So I just wanted to say that I agree that the varying perspectives in regards to what people had to say brought a lot more depth to the piece. And I wound up coming out of it, I don't know, with a better understanding or a broader understanding of it, which I really appreciated.
Great. Any last comment? Oh, so go right ahead. I heard somebody speaking up. Was it Karen? Yeah.
Karen, yes. I think this is one of the challenges and the exciting issues that we're going to face in the future. Teaching students to take time to think, because as the world progresses and AI becomes more and more a part of their lives, for us to get them to step back and really have them remember that we don't all have to think like robots. We don't have to go to Google to be, asking AI our answers. I don't know how I feel about this in the future and what we're going to be facing. So I think it's an extremely important issue, the stepping back, the thinking deeply. The leaders of the world, the society at large, we're going to need to think of opening our minds and thinking of different ways to do things. Because if the world changes and how we traditionally think of doing things, it's even more important to use art to think about being more creative with how we think.
I wholly agree with you. And I one of the messages that I think is so important in this kind of thing for young learners is that that taking time really matters. AI could come in and tell you all kinds of things, but this experience teaches us that the more you look, the more you see, the more time it takes, that nothing can replace that. Artificial intelligence can't replace it. And it also can't replace the fact that nothing can take the place of thinking for yourself, the value of thinking for yourself. And I think that, when people generate observations, they are generating stuff to think with, and nothing can replace that. So there's plenty, the conversation about AI is another conversation, but I think as museum educators, we don't need to be too afraid of it, because I really don't think that AI can replace some of what's most essential to the kind of work that we and that you are doing. So I appreciate that comment.
And I think we all agree on that. We just want the rest of the world to agree with us.
It is a challenge, and you are all in a position of actually being able to design the experiences that let people do that. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring in those last two steps, the me, we step, because I think that's also something that is irreplaceable by other means, which is crafting a situation where we really invite people to make a personal connection, see the value of other people's personal connections, and then broaden out into larger world stories. And one of the things that motivated us developing artful thinking, and before that visible thinking, to develop thinking routines, was understanding that so often in education, we implicitly hope certain kinds of learning will happen, but we don't create very simple scaffolds to make it happen. So earlier we talked about the importance of making that learning becoming meaningful when we make a personal connection. And we probably all believe that, and many educators believe that. But if we want it to happen, a really good bet way to get it to happen is to explicitly ask for it to happen. Just like a really good bet way to ask people to take time to see more is to ask people to take time to see more. And I know many of you use the thinking routine, looking 5 times 2, and there are plenty, and we did that a little bit when we were looking. We talked about first glance, second glance, but setting up experiences where explicitly scaffold the kind of learning moves that we value as goals that we just articulated, I think is the power in these kinds of thinking routines, and it was what they were designed to do. Tony, I
I
noticed.
I wanted to comment on something you said a moment ago, which I wrote down, which I think is an extraordinary sentence, which is nothing can take the place of thinking for yourself. It's such a simple and clear idea. And I'm thinking for my older grades, I think I am now going to write that before beginning in big letters on the whiteboard. In every class, I don't know, 3rd grade and above, nothing can take the place of thinking for yourself. Wow, it's huge. Thank you.
Well, I agree. I agree. But I think what we sort of show here is that, that sense of agency is fabulous, that I can think for myself, but also literally nobody can say what they see other than you. And once you say that, you can build on that. So it's an essential, what I hope to communicate to learners is that thinking for yourself is an essential part of knowledge building. It's not one we can dispense with. And I think that the kind of work that you do shows that. So I appreciate that comment. Kelsey.
Yeah, it reminded me of what we're talking about, reminded me of this idea of confidence building in students as like a sign of learning as well. And thinking about when I'm in a classroom, like the very tangible signs that I look for in students in terms of what engagement is. And one of the things that I noticed was like, as we kept tunneling with those questions and that scaffold, more hands would go up, responses would come faster. People really they gained confidence in their own observations, and in the space that you had created for us to share those observations. So it was sort of like, it was just, you were watching students, in this case, us kind of really own our thoughts in a collaborative way, which was nice.
Nicely put, thank you. I'm looking at the time, and I know that we want to make sure to have time to talk about your questions. So I think that now is probably a good time for us to take a 5-minute break. So why don't we just do that and come back, and then we'll sort of open up. I have a slide to share that have some of your former questions and some space to write in some new questions, and we can try to take up some things that are on your mind. Does that sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, see you in 5 minutes.
have 18 people. participating. Okay. 3 of them are staff, and Sharon and then Sherry. So it's actually 14 people. Well, this is break time. Taking a break. Standing.
Lily, I'll pick her up. She's part of me back.
Okay, great. If you have enough ice cream. It'd be better for her to have it here just if she gets.
Hello.
This is wonderful. Really, I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, not as much as I am, or hopefully as much as I am. I am too. I'm also was just reflecting, and hopefully others can hear me now too. Oh, just what an inspired bunch you are. I mean, I just really admire the seriousness with which you take this work. You're also very skilled. It's just really, I haven't, the San Jose Museum of Art hadn't been on my radar screen as a place that was using artful thinking. And I wish I could come out and study you for a while, because it sounds like some very exciting stuff's happening.
Thank you. It's a great organization. Let's Look at Art, and the museum too. But yeah, I've never worked with an organization like this.
I was going to just offer something that I heard a while back that's kind of stuck with me. And it's just a simple sentence that children every day are deciding what is important in their lives. And it helps me to realize the value and the importance of what we do and how we do it and all of that. So just think of every age.
That really sort of, it's a beautiful thought that they're thinking every day about what's important in their lives, and it also sort of raises the bar for us, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, it's simple, but the more I think about it, it's powerful. Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna share my screen again quickly, but then we'll come back as a group. So now Kelsey sent me some questions that you had sent her, and I know you've come today with more questions. I took the questions that she sent me and I roughly clustered them. Let me show you. I'll show you what I have. Actually, hold on one second. It's going to take me a minute to figure it out. So ignore that. Let me get here. Anyways, I roughly clustered them into areas that I thought were just generally broad. And I'm trying to get back to my original slideshow, and I'm not having a good, there we go. Okay, there. Sorry about this. Okay, I think I can do it now. Now I just have to get this on slideshow mode. There we go. Okay, so these are some questions that you shared with me. Let me just say a bit about the cluster of questions. Then let me collect some additional questions, and then we'll capture. I'll try to capture the text, and we'll go off. I'll stop sharing my screen so we can talk as a group about some of these, and I can put the text in the chat. Make sense? So just roughly, there's a couple of questions about, I'm looking on the upper left now. whether it's sort of changing the order of see, think, wonder to see, wonder, think. When do you know it's a good time to introduce a second thinking routine? These are both great questions. I think a bigger question there is, what are the purposes of particular steps, and when does order matter? What are they really trying to get at? What are we trying to get at in the think step? What are we trying to get in a wonder step? So maybe if there's questions about specific steps and routines and transitions, we can cluster them there. Really, super important question that many people have brought up, and you brought up, and I imagine it's on your mind, is how to handle the challenge of information. I think you're all sophisticated enough to know that there's no magic recipe for how you handle information in these contexts, in these conversations, that doesn't stifle the conversation, but still adds to it. So that's a great conversation topic, and I'd love to talk about that. Then in this cluster here, the purple cluster, let me look at this. This one, I'm just sort of taking, this has to do with looking 10 times 2, but I think it's really about close looking. I mean, how do you get people to have a first glance and go beyond a first glance to have a second glance? I did a little something around that with you, and we did the C step earlier, and there are plenty of techniques, and I suspect you all have some techniques I could learn from. But here, this idea of how do we get people to look more deeply? So those are some of the things that struck me as on your mind. I am going to now bravely try to go do that and write down some of your questions. So does anybody want to add some questions in here? And we'll put them on a list and then we'll capture the text. Yeah.
Is Marcia on? Because I have some questions that I had asked the docents, the Art in the Dark docents, to come up with questions before this presentation, with the idea that we'd make our best at trying to address the questions
Great.
that they came up with. So I have some here from Marcia. I'm not sure if she's still on, but
I'm here. She's there. Yeah.
Do you want to read? I can read your questions, Marcia, or you can read your questions, whichever you like.
Please do it, Trisha.
Okay.
Are they? Can you put them in chat? I mean, if I go off screen share, why don't we? Maybe that's the best way to do that then.
So I'll put them in chat here.
I have one too to add.
Okay, we can just keep questions in chat.
Mine's just real simple. I mean, the answer is not simple, but.
Yeah, so did you get, let's see, is it sending it to you? Are you getting it?
Not yet.
Did you put it in the chat?
Yeah, I did.
I don't see it, but you could.
I don't either. I'm not convinced that it sent it. I think it's because it's too large. So let me break it down.
My question is just, if you only have 45 minutes, which is typically to 50 minutes in the classroom, and you're trying to show a variety of images.
Thank you, Trisha. How
can you use this method? Is it okay to use this method, with a couple of different images, but you're not going to have the breadth that we're having here, the videos that we've seen of people, is spending a lot of time with a lot of different students answering and thinking through things. And we don't have that time, unfortunately, in the classroom.
So what's at the heart of that question? And other people can chip in too. I mean, time is always an issue. So is it, it's
coverage of a variety of imagery and history or art, things that would be, I think, it's been welcomed the way we do it with teachers. And we'd love to we're planning to do more of the artful thinking. It's just time is always a challenge. We don't have, we're not in the museum where they're just sitting and we're talking about one thing the entire time. So that was my question. Yeah.
Does anybody want to add to that? I think I get it's the depth, the classic depth versus breadth.
Exactly.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think our Sherry and Marcia had the question, and I had the question too, and Toby, and probably all the Art in the Dark docents have the same question. And it's because when we're invited to a classroom, it's because we're asked to connect the art to whatever they're learning. And so let's say it's a history class and they're learning about the Greeks. Then we tried to go through and present the ideals of the ancient Greek versus the artwork and how the two relate and get the kids thinking about that. And so our challenge is to cover to add a dimension of just broadening a little bit how they're thinking within the context of our presentation. So how do we kind of, because the teachers may, well, unlikely that they will have any artful thinking background, unlikely that they would have gone through this with their students. It's just not the environment that we're in.
Yeah, no, I get it. And and I'm going to disappoint you by saying there's no easy answer. Let me throw in a few thoughts, and then I invite other people to throw in thoughts, because I think other people have some thoughts that are going to be as helpful, if not more than mine. Here's some things I would say. One is often teachers think they want one thing, but find value in other things. So they think they want, the museum folks to come in and do some curriculum coverage for them so that they've taken care of teaching those themes in the curriculum, or they've done something like that. But if you ask the teachers, what questions do you really want students to leave this unit with, or with this, or to develop in this experience, or if you sort of push teachers a little bit about what their real goals are, you might find yourselves with a little bit more latitude in terms of your expectation around coverage. I know that's not a big thing, but helping teachers sort of clarify their goals can be helpful. And then also for you, I mean, when we had that conversation about signs of learning, you have some really, I think, powerful learning goals in mind. And it may be helpful just for you to know what your learning goals are, understanding that there's going to be some tension there. But if your learning goal is to, let's just pick up on showing students the power of thinking for themselves, then somehow that's going to have a place of prominence in what you do. I know these are very easy to say, hard to do. Another thing I would say is that I have found, when faced with the challenge of coverage, that rather than think about dicing up the coverage in smaller and smaller units, to give one thing a lot of coverage and all the rest just a tiny little bit, so that people can get some big idea, and then you provide some structures for them to find out more resources on their own. And now, of course, with information, both good and bad, so readily available at young people's fingertips, at all of our fingertips, it's often expected that you'll leave an experience and go off and find out something for yourselves. So giving them the tools to do that without necessarily taking the time. So I guess just to reiterate this last point, and I would say this is a value that I have brought across most of my work for the past few decades, is that it's better to go deep and then do a little bit of a bunch of shallow stuff, rather than try to distribute the shallowness evenly across an experience. That's just my own personal view. Who else would like to chime in on this super important theme challenge?
I agree with you, Sherry. And I know when, like, I do Middle Ages, and I do like 4 parts, and each one might be 45 minutes to an hour. But I think what I'm getting out of this is, if we even took 1 or 2 of the artworks in the 45-minute presentation and had those go deeper, it might give more meaning to the rest of them, to again, trying to get them to kind of bring this kind of thinking into everything. I mean, it's like, okay, I learned VTS. What's going on in this picture? What do you see that makes you say that? What more can we find? And I apply that in a lot of things. It's kind of been embedded in me. And, I used to do drive-bys at the museums. I've seen a lot of museums, and now I don't get to see everything, but I look at it more deeply. So anyway, that's basically what I would say.
I agree with you. Anybody else want to throw in a thought before we move to another theme?
I just want to add that maybe with contemporary art, it makes sense to ask the students to think and look from perspective of artists and through the media, especially when artists use mixed media. And like in this example, we use photography and what the possibilities of photography. What photography connects the past and the present, and what the frame the media is a message sometimes, and why do you think the artists use this media or mixed media? And there is often behind very long story, a very, very interesting story, biography of artist or his connection with other. So it's kind of interesting thing also about the perspective of artists sometimes, or ask them, why do you think he used, if what your perspective if you're the artist? And
Thank you. Great comment. I'm looking in the chat at our questions, and I'm also just noticing our time. So I want to make sure we get to talk about everything we talk about it. So we can come back to that, but that's sort of our first challenge. So the second one is, how do I reach or engage students with artful thinking when we've never met before, when they have no familiar with our program yourself? How do you get students interested the fastest? Well, I'll share my quick thought, and then I want people to jump in because you all have experience with that. But I think, again, coming back to this, an experience that quickly shows a student that their thoughts matter, whether it's that they're adding one perspective to a larger sort of constellation of perspectives that expand a possibility space, or whether they see something that somebody didn't see. But as soon as somebody thinks they matter to a conversation, chances are they're engaged, unless there are other issues. Let me just say one other thing about that, though, because I think it's important. That lately I've been looking at research on curiosity, and this is going to sound like a sigh, but I think it applies here. Often when we invite people to make their own observations or ask their own questions, sometimes, and you've probably seen this, kids will say something that's a little awkward. Self-confidence and self-consciousness can be an issue in these sorts of situations. And, if you look at research on curiosity, you see what we all kind of know in our hearts, which is that asking questions is indeed risk-taking. Sometimes you do say dumb stuff, and that's part of the process. Let's hope that somebody in this conversation is going to say something awkward or dumb or seemingly out of bounds, because that's how conversations move forward. So I say that by way of saying, I think another way that you can make people feel part of the experience, two ways, is one, to make them feel like they actually have something genuinely to offer, and B, to let people know that that there's going to be some risk taking, and that's part of the process, and that dumb stuff might get, don't have to say dumb stuff might get said, but try to help the people who are uncertain about actually saying something appropriate. What thoughts do you all have about engaging people who haven't been exposed to this kind of process? What wisdom can you share with your colleagues? Trisha.
I think so. The part I'm struggle with is, well, for high school, I feel like the step inside has been very useful, and the kids are likely to engage with that. But the the question of high school kids have exactly the issue that you spoke of, that they're not confident, they don't want to say anything, and there's always the one in the class that does all the talking, and that one's easy to get stuff from. But high school is not at all like what you just experienced with the docents here. You know, that's not high school. That's not us going into a class as a visitor for a one-time shot. So
yeah,
the whole idea of how to phrase and position a question so that those students engage is I think a big challenge. And
yeah, no,
I guess
you know,
I'd like to hear your ideas on how, so put them in the highly difficult to engage category. And how do we do that?
Yeah, you know, you're great question. And I again think there's probably a lot of wisdom in this room, virtual room. But some little tricks I use, and I suspect you use, is, you know, if you want people to talk, have them first talk to a neighbor for 30 seconds, because once you sort of start greasing the wheels of talking, people are more likely to talk. Or write down one thing that everybody can write down, you know, what's one color, one line, and one shape that you see. Share it with a neighbor, then let's talk out loud. Or you know, whatever it is. I mean, the idea behind this is try to think of the most low bar entry points to a question. And often they're just talking with a partner, not talking in a whole group, and have people do that first. And then suddenly the bar can start floating up. So that's my general approach. I wonder what other wisdom people have to offer for this challenge.
I agree that
Okay.
having them talk to each other is huge. Yeah. And then they start to open up after that. Yeah.
I think voting we often use as the lowest bar. So
say it again.
Voting.
Voting is a little.
And voting, yeah, polling.
Having a class all have to raise their hand about something is just that teeny little entrance.
Yep, no, voting, you're absolutely right. Voting is even a lower entry bar than talking to a neighbor. Another little twist here is you can, that when you ask people to turn and talk to a neighbor, instead of asking them to say something, ask them to ask an interview question of the neighbor. You know, turn to somebody and ask them what their, you know, what part of the picture do they find the most mysterious? So you don't have to answer the question, you get to ask the question. Of course, somebody has to answer it, but it's another low bar entryway.
And I found too that sometimes sharing someone else's opinion is less scary than sharing your own. So if you do interview somebody, and then you're asked to share with a larger group, sharing your partner's observations can sometimes be slightly less personal, than sharing your own thoughts or feelings.
That's a great comment. Of course, you have to ask permission first, you know, but
right.
But no one says no, but that's a great comment. Any other little technique that somebody wants to share in this?
Sometimes, depends on the picture, of course, the piece of art. I find besides sharing is really breaking up in groups in 3 and 4s and having to make up a story. And then tell me their story. What do you think's going on in here, but as a group? And we can get some pretty creative stories.
Oh, I love that. I love that. I love that. That reminds me of a variation on Step Inside that some of you may do that I find really powerful. You need some time to do it, but for Step Inside to have students write down something that they think the, let's say, person in the image would say to them. What would this wrestler have to tell us? What advice would this wrestler have for us for our lives today? Write down one sentence from the perspective of the wrestler, and then you write it down. This is a version of Step Inside. Each student writes down one sentence of what the wrestler would say. Then you break people into groups, and each group has to make a poem out of the 5 statements that each student has brought in and then perform the poem. And you just be just shocked at what you can get. It's like making up a story, but it's sort of a collective story made. It's a poem instead of a story. Okay, looking at our time. So oh gosh, I feel like I could spend all day with you, but we don't have all day. So I'm just going to keep looking at our list and we can come back to things. The third question, do we foresee any challenges about the use of heavy digital images and presenting in the dark? Whoever asked that question, can you say a little bit more about your concern?
Marcia, it's you.
And unfortunately, I wrote it weeks ago, but we're in a darkened room. Would that affect how much engagement we can have? I'm trying to remember what else I was thinking at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that is absolutely a logistical challenge when you're in a darkened room so you can see an image well, and it sort of sets an odd tone for an engaged group discussion. Does anybody?
Because many of the videos that I saw, folks were standing or seated in front of the artwork. So this is in 2 dimensions, and again, they're a bit more resistant. This is our first meeting, so it's maybe there is no easy answer. We just move forward. We carry on. But I invite any thoughts you have.
I'm familiar with the challenge. Sometimes I will be strident in my urging of people to get up out of their seats and come closer to the screen and take a look, just as a way of trying to loosen up the room. But beyond that, I'm not sure I have, and turning to a partner and talking, but those are my tricks.
That's an aha. I've never had them come closer to the screen. Thank you.
Anybody want to throw anything in here?
Well, you could always have the lights turned on for a little bit after they've looked at it. If it's really that dark. Usually it's not that dark in the classrooms. Just generally enough light, but
I'm looking at the questions.
Using Zoom on some of the pictures makes a big difference if they don't
You
have
mean
time.
zooming in?
Right on the piece itself, because you can't always have time, because it takes a lot of time for the students to come up and look close, which I have let them do many times. But then sometimes it's the orchestration getting back to their seats and all of that. So trying to zoom in, and then I'll say, what part do you want me to zoom in on, so that I can move it around a little bit better. It helps.
And notice that, and that's a beautiful technique, absolutely. And notice that these techniques have to do with giving students agency. I mean, one of the problems with a darkened room is that you feel like it's telling the audience to be passive, and everybody's supposed to be passive. So what you're trying to do is to create opportunities for agency. And I think there's lots of ways to do that you've shared.
An alternative to have the students come up to the room is for you to go around to them and give them the light pen to share. To focus on the screen. I found that to be really successful. Kids get excited about that.
I find most
and
of the
I'm
light
the one
pens
that's
don't
moving
work
around
on
the
the
room.
screens.
Pardon me?
Most of the light pens don't work on the screens.
They don't work on
The light pens do
anymore.
not reflect on the screens. It's just, I had one yesterday. It's just so frustrating that I get the
I've never had
pointer
that
out and it
experience.
doesn't reflect.
Yeah, I think
that's a technology, Beth and Karen. It's like if you're using a TV, it's not going to work. Whereas if you're using a white screen, it is going to. It all depends on if the projection's coming from overhead, a far away. Anyway.
Okay.
Okay, I've never had that problem. So
doesn't.
there's a way to make it work. The light is red, it focuses on the screen. The beam of light is red, and it's worked. Whatever I'm handing them, it's worked.
It doesn't work in a lot of classes.
Okay.
But you can plan ahead, and that's what I do, is just you can crop the image, and we're doing digital, just have some cropped images. That's a simple, very simple solution if you just pre-plan. Yeah.
I'm going to keep going because I just want to make sure we at least have quick touch on all these. So the next question is, we've talked a bit about this. This is a version of the depth versus breadth. I'm looking at question 4. But also I think this raises the issue of information, right? I mean, how much do we, I mean, one way to interpret this question, and whoever is the author of this question will have to make sure that their meaning is communicated, because I might not be getting it right. But one way to interpret is that what should our real learning goals be? Should they be the kinds of goals that we talked about earlier when we were talking about signs of learning and the kinds of thinking dispositions that Artful Thinking says are important learning goals, or should they be more informational, more content-based, and sort of where do we come down on that and how do we handle that? And that's just a huge issue. Did I get that question right? Who asked
Yes,
that?
it was me. And yes, it's that I love that you stated it, informational versus, let's say, experiential. And thank you for confirming that it's a challenge.
You know, and I'll turn this over to you in a second, but I'll say a few things about information. One is that, and this is something, of course, you know, there are lots of different kinds of information, and we're sort of trained to think of information as, you know, text that comes across in a book or on screen or online or wherever and tells us something. But as I showed you today, you know, another kind of information is just juxtaposition of other images, right? Or quotes from an artist, or, you know, so I think that one challenge of information is expanding what people think of as information. It is informative to find out what everybody else thinks about a work, or all the other things that people see. I found it tremendously informative to hear your observations in the C step, because it literally informed me about parts of that work that I hadn't noticed. So, but we don't typically, we have a very narrow default notion of information. And I think educators working in schools these days, and this has probably been the case for a long time, there's so much press for coverage that the schools also tend to narrow what our conception of information is. So, and I guess that, you know, I'm going to be like an old record now, but one of the messages I think for me personally is so important to communicate is that some crucial information about what we're looking at comes from you, comes from what you see. This is back to thinking and seeing for yourself. And so one is expanding the notion of information. And then another really important thing is to get clear about our learning goals. You know, we can't do everything. Teachers in the classroom can't do everything. State standards can't do everything. We sort of have to decide in the time we have, what are the goals that are really important to us, and then design around them. You can't do both. You make hard choices. I know those aren't very satisfying answers, but what other thoughts do people want to throw in here?
Could I draw attention to Karen's question as perhaps an even more specific question around information and when
Yes, I
to
had
provide it?
that.
So specific to sharing info, in the past, I have not given much, especially for non-historical images. I offer students the possibility to imagine themselves as the artist, to think of a title or possibly no title at all. Do you think providing info sooner or giving the title stifles their ideas and predisposes them to think in a certain way?
Really great, important question that I ask myself every time I show an image. I asked myself today before I showed you the image, should I tell you the title ahead of time or not? I guess I find that it's work dependent. I mean, I generally like to try to show a work without showing the title first if I think it makes sense with the audience, just because I think it just is likely to open up the conversation a little bit more, but there is no hard and fast rule. And I didn't with you today. I shared it partially because I know for that artist, the title of that series is important. I mean, for some artists, the title that they give a work isn't particularly important. I knew it was important, but I also know that you, who are art experts, would want that might be in your mind, and that that question might block you. Okay, so I guess another thing I want to say here is when I when I design experience and think about how to fold information in, not only do I try to think of information in an expansive way, but I also try to remember that my goal with information is always to open up inquiry, not close inquiry. So I always want to be able to present information in a way that raises questions as well as may answer questions. And that's, I think, this goes back to one of your questions about this, see, think, wonder versus see, wonder, think. One of the purposes of the step that asks people to brainstorm questions is to show how having a variety of different types of questions really sketches a rich possibility space, even if those questions aren't answered. To find out that you can ask biographical questions, historical questions, questions about personal interpretation, questions about provenance, questions about meaning, that you can ask all these different kinds of questions about a work. That's a piece of information about the multidimensionality of that work. So I think that the link between the giving of information and the asking of various kinds of questions is very close. That's
Thank you.
just the thought.
Yeah.
Anybody want to throw anything else in there?
I like your idea of asking questions or of providing information that will raise questions in their mind. So that's very helpful to think of it in that way. You're not giving them information that's going to stifle them. You're giving them information that's going to open things up. Thank you. And to build on that, harking back to something I said earlier about the value of being explicit, and a way to raise the likelihood that that will happen is to ask them, so now that I told you that, what new questions do you have? It's that sort of explicit.
Love that.
Helpful. Okay, I'm looking over the questions. If anybody has something that they really want to talk about or ask, now is a good time, because I know our time is
Sherry,
Yeah.
I have a question. I think, and all of us, because for instance, most of us were trained on VTS and it's very regimented. I mean, it's like you have to ask this question and then this
Very
question and
familiar.
this, and it's kind of follow the rules. And I guess one of my biggest questions was how critical to achieve more thoughtful
responses.
Yes, from the students, is it to follow exact procedure? You know what I mean? Like I'm like, do we literally have to?
I hear what you're saying, and I'm familiar with that challenge. I mean, one might be, do you have to follow them lockstep? First do see, draw a hard line, then do think, draw a hard line, then do wonder. Because as we can see from our conversation, often you're going back and forth, there's, so my own view is that semi-loose structure can play a very important role. I don't like I'm a little put off by some of the rigidity of VTS, even though I think VTS is a very powerful thinking routine. Notice it's one thinking routine among many. It's a whole program that's built around one thinking routine. And I understand, but I do think there is value in keeping things somewhat separate when possible, so that not that it's so loose that any comment goes. And the reason is because I think it provides, and there's a bunch of reasons, but one important reason is that it helps students. It gives them a structure and a place to land. If I know that what we're supposed to be doing now is just talking about what we see, or maybe we're talking about what we see and what we feel and what we sense, but if I have a question, there's a place for it later. It just provides, it's a scaffold, it's a support, an open-ended conversation that's freewheeling and they can go in any direction, and that has all kinds of input from all kinds of areas. That's a very sophisticated and hard conversation to swim in. It's easier to swim when you have rules that can be broken, but that can also hold you. So I guess that's my view about the structure. I'm not for rigidity, but I think that the messiness of no structure is a difficult place to be as a learner. Does anybody have anything what they want to add or sort of chime in around that? Because I think it's something you must all think about. You know, oh, I'm sorry, Tony, you were about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think that I also struggle with this a lot because I find VTS confining. And as the years have gone by and my experience in classrooms has grown, I find that I can use it more effectively because I can use it less, I think, but it never completely goes away. And it's always there to fall back on. But I think that each of us should find a way to develop confidence in our own approaches to teaching and not let a sort of rigid commitment to VTS stand in the way of, because I think when one communicates best when one is communicating in one's own personal language.
I like that. Thank you. Kelsey,
Yeah, I was just gonna, this is posing another question, but thinking about going back to this idea of like learning goals and knowing what our goals for our presentation and student inquiry are. Maybe my question is around how to determine when to use certain thinking routines over others to scaffold that inquiry process for students. Like, do they all kind of played sort of different roles and lead students through different processes. And I'm wondering if maybe there's some way to navigate the rigidity of the routines by saying, well, my goal right now is just close looking, right? Or my goal now is to, I don't know what another stage might be as an example off the top of my head, but like thinking about how to layer routines based off of those inquiry goals, maybe.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. And this is when you have to make your really hard choices. You have an hour with the students, you have this limited time. Ask yourself, what are the one or two takeaways I really want them to walk away with? Maybe one is that close, careful, focused looking is really rich. Maybe another is hearing multiple different viewpoints enriches a conversation. Those two are more than enough for 1 hour. I want to be respectful of people's time, and I think we're at time. So as much as I would love to keep chatting with you, I know you're at the beginnings of your day and you have things to do. So I will just say, you're doing great work, fabulous, important work, and it's been an honor to talk with you. And I am sure that every student that is in any of your presentations is a fortunate student. And there is so much that we can all be learning. So I thank you for sharing your time today. And maybe we'll meet again, who knows? But I think I'm going to just have to wrap it there. Does that make sense, Kelsey?
I think that we blocked off time until noon for lingering questions and things like that.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay,
just in case, yes.
Okay.
And I'm not sure how many people can stay on for that extra half hour, but we did mention it to them.
Well, should we, I see Karen has a hand up and now we probably all feel like we can talk a little more, but if some folks have to leave, I don't want you to feel awkward about leaving. Now would be a good time to leave if you need to. And if you need to leave at any time over the next 25 minutes, feel free. Karen, you have something you want to say, and then I have something I want to say.
Yeah. I would love your input on the technique of, let's say there's a lull in responses and docents are looking for a way to get involvement, which has been talked about already. How do you feel about calling on a student that doesn't have their hand raised, and to think of that balance between making them feel important because you want to know what they're thinking, but yet, since we don't know them, it could be the kind of student that's going to freeze up or feel intimidated. You could be pushing them away even more. So do you have any thoughts about how to achieve that balance and when and if to do it?
Yeah, that's a big one. And again, see what some other folks have to say. You know, I guess just some general principle there are low bar. You know, that if you're going to if you're going to put somebody on a spot, which none of us want to do, but if sometimes we feel it's important, then you want to make that spot the easiest, most comfortable possible place to be. So maybe, you know, it's adding something to somebody else's comment that's quite easy. You know, so-and-so said that they noticed the room was dark. Is there some place that you see darkness, or do you know, something like that? You know, just trying to give people a leg up. But then designing so that we don't have to do that, because it's, you know, it's hard, and some students just, language isn't their modality, speaking in a large group isn't what they can do. So finding opportunities to talk to a neighbor, to write something down. You know, I know one technique that you know, I've seen educators use. I don't know whether it's something you can do, but you know, you write something, one word or something on a post-it, and everybody comes up and puts their post-its up on the front board or something, so that you're engaged, but in a way that might be more comfortable than directly speaking. What's some of people's best tricks in this? Because this is a really important and hard one. Anybody have a
When
good
you
trick?
were just saying low balling, I just was thinking about this. Not that I've ever used it, but I just thought that it might be a good idea. And the low ball, getting about to say, look at it and says, do you agree with what your neighbor said?
That's another one, nice one.
Keeping it low, it'd be a yes or a no, or they can expand. I don't know, maybe it works, but has anybody tried that before? No, okay.
I haven't, but I'm filing it away.
Let's see what happens.
I'm filing
I
it
think for
away.
a teen, that might be a little hard.
Actually, the voting gets
It's
you
better.
there.
Yeah.
The
right.
voting, yeah.
And it's more anonymous.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If you were to say, do you agree with what your neighbor says, then the person who said something might feel put on a spotlight. And if the answer is no, then they might feel bad, or, you know.
Okay, good point.
Just
Peer
because they're
pressure.
young. Yeah, because
Good
they're
point.
young.
Good point. Thank you.
I like something that Trisha does, which is she will point to one row in the classroom and say, may I hear from someone in this row? And it sort of takes the pressure off the whole room to part of the room.
That's nice.
Sometimes you can ask for one word too, so people feel pressured to come up with like full sentences. Sometimes you can ask them like, what's one word that comes to mind when you look at this? Because then they don't have to really have a full thought around it necessarily.
That's a good one. And just to add on to that, another way to handle that is ask people to write down one word or two words, and then have everybody, this is an important one, I think. Give everybody time to write down something and then have people read it. And so people know it's not like they're being put on the spot. They know that they're going to have to read something that they wrote down, but they get to write it down first. So they have that moment of think time, which is really, you know, giving people a little bit of, well, you all know the research on think time, just the littlest bit of think time before people have to respond. And that, so that's another piece of the trick here is, you know, you can say, I'm going to call on, hopefully we don't always do this, but I'm going to call on 5 people who haven't, you know, 5 people. But, and here's the question, but before I do, I'm going to give you 15 seconds to think about it. And then ask, and so people are a little more prepared. Can I go back to, sorry, Trisha, you have something. Yeah.
Sherry, I have a question, and I'm reluctant to ask it because gosh, I hope it's not a disaster, but we've decided that we've taken the thinking routine and applied it to each presentation we have. So we've kind of decided what thinking routine would best suit that presentation. And we've gone down that path as a way of introducing it this year for the first time into our presentations. So, and I hope that's palatable. So given that that's what we've done, how best for us to get the best result out of that approach?
And the thinking,
because yeah.
Can you share something,
the
Tricia?
thinking routines are see, think, wonder, and step inside are the 2 routines and looking 10 times 2.
Yeah, so what we did basically was for the middle school, most of the middle school presentations, which a lot of them are history, science, or math based, we've stuck with this see, think, wonder. And then for the high school routines, which tend to be things more like civil rights, Mexican art and activism, things like that, we've done the step inside. And then for the art classroom routines, which are, digital, visual, blah, 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 we've done the looking times 2. So right. We kind of went down that path, and maybe that's the wrong path, but that's the path we took. So my question is how best to execute that? What is some advice you have for us or things we can do?
Okay. First of all, I think it's a great path. I mean, I think it's a fine path. And so I'm going to stand way back and say something about why these are called routines, and then come in a little closer and try to say something more specific about your question. So when this work was done, it was part of a larger research project, and it was the original idea of thinking routines was how to address the question, how do we create thinking people rather than teach thinking skills? So we all know how to teach skills, but what is it that makes a disposition? And one of the things that makes a disposition is having sort of routine habits of mind, routine patterns of thinking. And so that's why we believe it's good to repeat routines, because if you think close observation is important, then you want to routinely look at the world in a closely observed way. If you think building thoughtful interpretations, evidence-based interpretations are important, as one might do in a think step, then you want to make sure that you have routine opportunities to think carefully about constructing interpretations across multiple contexts. So that's all by way of saying it's great that you're repeating these things, because they're designed to develop habits of mind that we believe are powerful across contexts. Of course, the challenge is not making them seem so boring and like, oh, we're doing the same old thing, same thing over and over. So what I try to do is find variation within structure. So there are lots of different ways to look closely, to see, and I think you all have probably some great techniques, and you can look around for other techniques, make a list of 5 things, share with a neighbor, zoom in, zoom out, there's all kinds of different ways that you can approach that habit of mind. Same with thinking and same with asking questions. So I think you're looking for variety within familiarity. That's not a very satisfying answer, but that is the one I will probably stick with.
I actually think that's great. I think that's great insight. At least it was for me.
I remember once when we were in the early days of Artful Thinking, when we were meeting with some parents, and a parent said, oh, we were someplace with my son the other day, and he said, Mom, do a see, think, wonder. And it was like, yes, that's what we want. I mean, I guess, Yeah, so I get, so yes, you're trying to teach habits of mind, and the habits of mind are within the steps, not the entire routine necessarily. And other questions. I have one thing I want to share with you, but I'm going to wait a little bit. So any other questions or things that are on your mind?
I was also thinking that by nature of focusing on one thinking routine per presentation, it gives you a ton of opportunity to really scaffold engagement, to like talking about how uncomfortable students might be with this at the very beginning, and thinking about how we might start with a writing only, like you write down your thoughts rather than having to share with others. And then the next time you do it, you pair and share. And then the next time you do it, you do large group. Or, like if you have a particularly reticent group of students. So I think it's kind of genius to have one routine that you're getting students really familiar with throughout the presentation, because then you, as Shari said, in terms of finding that variation and repetition, you can also think about that problem or that challenge of student comfort that was brought up earlier.
Yeah, no, I like that. Thank you. Tony, you want to throw something in?
Yeah, I had a question actually. I've heard scaffolding used as a metaphor 3 or 4 or 5 times during this presentation. Can you clarify that for me?
Sure, and clarification with an apology, because it's sort of like sometimes, it's a word that we have to remember sometimes not to use in education because it's a funny word. And but basically scaffolding just means, I'm going to make this segue into the point that I just wanted to make. Scaffolding means providing structures that can help hold people. I mean, it's sort of a literal meaning. So earlier we were talking about the value of keeping some loose difference between a question. So see is different than think, then is different than wonder. That differentiation, I believe, is a kind of scaffolding, because it helps people know what to do when. Scaffolding holds you in a place where you can do the job, So scaffolding could be asking people to, all of the things we're mentioning today can function as scaffolding, but it's structures that can hold, but not rigidly. And so if you don't mind, I'll use that as a segue into a point I wanted to make earlier when I was afraid we were running out of time, which is, you may or may not know that the work of artful thinking came out of an earlier research project at Project Zero called visible thinking. And we think of it as a part of visible thinking. And the idea, and I know it's not something that you can always do, but the idea of keeping things in categories. I'm looking closely now, I'm asking questions now, I'm building interpretations now. And making that visible to students can provide really important scaffolding and also can speak to some of your learning goals. So the idea of visible thinking is that when you see, and seeing can also mean hearing, it doesn't have to be visible, but sometimes it helps to make it visible. You see yourself as part of the picture of knowledge building. When you see your ideas get up there on a list or out there in public, all of a sudden you see yourself as part of the game of building knowledge. That's a really important thing. You also see where you belong. So again, the students who might say something out of turn, but we have a place for that. We can put it under the C category. We can put it in the question category. If it doesn't seem to belong to anything, we can draw a line and put it someplace else, just so it has a place in the representation. But the idea that the game or the enterprise of building knowledge, building understanding, is something that can be externalized and manipulated is the idea of visible thinking. And the idea behind that is that it provides a strong scaffold for thinking. I hope that didn't sound too theoretical, but that's the point I wanted to make earlier. Does that help, Tony?
Yes, very much. Thank you.
I like the image that I get when you use the word scaffolding, Sherry. You said that maybe you shouldn't be using it in education, but I think it's very relevant, because we're not only providing students with the support they need, because they don't have to have any background in art to be successful with what we do. So we're giving them the support, But then a scaffold also lets you climb, which is the metaphor for building and learning more through collaboration.
Right,
So
and
that's a great word to be using, I think.
and
Thank you. I love the
nice
image.
that you're reminded of the building. On the theme of words, I remember actually the original funder of the Visible Thinking Project used to talk, he was actually an architect, and he used to talk about open architecture. And I used to think that was a really good term too. It's not exactly like scaffolding, and it reminds me of that Joanna Vasconcelos teapot that we looked at in the very beginning, which is, you know, this, I don't know if you how you thought of it when we were looking at, but when I was trying to think about which one I was going to choose, you know, I was tempted for that because that provides structure, but also transparency. So you can move in and out of it. And yet there's enough structure there to hold the idea of a teapot. This is all very metaphorical, but this notion of scaffolding or open architecture being holding, but also something that lets light in, that isn't rigid, and that can be somewhat flexible. Any other thoughts or questions that people would like to share? Trisha.
Sorry, I keep asking, but we have a teacher's website, and we use on that, we have, and what I mean by that is a website that's built for teachers to access before the presentation or after the presentation. And one of the things that we have on that website for every presentation is after the presentation activities. And I guess what I'm asking is, what suggestions would you have for us in terms of incorporating the thinking routine that we've used throughout the presentation in an after presentation activity? You know, what guidance could you give us as to how best to do that?
It's a great question. I'm so glad to hear you have that website. And, you know, I'm be curious to hear what you already do. I think the things that come to mind for me are, I mean, the obvious suspects, which I suspect you may already do, which is sort of two ways to go. Provide other images that teachers can use the routine on, and or provide other places in their curriculum where they can use the routine that are non-arts contexts. Now, I know that can be a little bit of a challenge for you, but sometimes it's not that hard to think of. And if you think back to this idea of a routine, I mean, you know, Artful Thinking was originally developed as a way to teach critical thinking through art that would apply across the curriculum. So we were very much interested in, okay, so we've learned how to look closely, think carefully about interpretations, and ask questions about a work of visual art. How can we do that looking at a piece of historical text? How can we look at that? How can we do that looking at a poem? How can we do that in a completely different context? Because then you're helping students to transfer this habit of mind that became vividly powerful in an arts context to another context. So I don't know to what extent your website offers those two things, that is, other art images that the teachers can use, or other curricular contexts, some guidance around how to use these routine in other curricular contexts.
Well, I think the other art, yes, but I think you've brought up a very interesting idea of other in other parts of their curriculum to not do it this way, to do it. And I think there was a video of a math teacher who's, and it could be from the National Gallery.
Oh yeah, the guy who did that. Yeah, I know what you mean. The maths teacher was outside in the sculpture garden.
Yeah, so I think it brings, it will make us think, and I think it'll be a challenge for us, but I think it's a very interesting idea. So thank you.
Here's a little cheat idea. One of my favorite go-tos to suggest for teachers, if they're learning See, Think, Wonder, or could be not Sept and Sci, but let's say See, Think, Wonder. What else could they use it on? You know what something's really interesting to use it on, especially for the upper grades? A table of contents of a textbook.
Oh.
And, you know, if you're a history teacher and you have your teacher look at a table of contents and say, what do you see? What do you notice about how it's structured? What do you think about how it's structured? What questions do you have about this 1-page or 2-page table of contents? You will get so deep into the essence of that discipline. So that's a sort of a simple thing that you can suggest to any teacher that uses a textbook.
Very interesting.
You know, and just in terms of history, you know, sometimes just the first few lines of an important document, if it's American history, the Constitution or something like that, you know, these are all things that you can put a frame around and look at closely and think carefully about. Any final question or thought that anybody wants to share?
Well, I'd like to just thank you and say that you've opened us up to so many new ways of thinking about this. And I think it really enriches our understanding. And I think it's going to lead to some wonderful new approaches in the classroom. And yeah, thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. As I said earlier, I you know, I can tell you're doing amazing work and I can't wait to hear about more.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time, Shari, and for agreeing to let us record and share this with our teammates who weren't able to make it today. I know it's an invaluable resource that we're excited to be able to have them experience as well.
Okay, and I think, Kelsey, I think you and I had talked about maybe chatting by phone afterwards to, if you want to talk about any follow-up. So maybe, you know, that's an opportunity for you. If anybody has any post our time together thoughts, share with Kelsey and she can communicate them to me.
Yeah, what I will do, team, is I will, once I receive the slide deck, I will include that and the recording for this meeting to those who were invited. And then I will attempt to include an opportunity to write in any thoughts, questions, feedback that you'd like to give. I will try and link a form to that email as well. So you should be able to give your feedback directly in that form, in that follow-up summary email.
Sherry, would there be a possibility that, because all of us are about to start going into classrooms, or some of us have, but would there be an opportunity for us, after having gone into the classroom and tried some things out, to ask questions then, or you know, because I think for us it's proof is in the pudding.
Yeah, I think that's something you should talk about with Kelsey, but I mean, if there was an opportunity for you to do some work and then share with me what you did and then for us to meet again, I don't know if that's what you're thinking, but if it's something like that, then, you know, talk with Kelsey and maybe it can be arranged.
Okay.
Before we say goodbye, I just want to remind Kelsey, thank you all for, I'm looking at your messages. Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been a wonderful conversation. I'm just going to remind you, Kelsey, to save the chat.
Oh, yeah, that would be helpful.
It was a pleasure to talk with you all. Thank you. And here's to possibly chatting again.
Yes.
Very
Thank
best.
you.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.